So welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Uh, we just learned that Biden has been declared winner of this presidential election. I've not timed it perfectly. This is just a few minutes before this meetup started. So, I think, so what I want to do is I want to give, what we are going to do is we are going to talk about politics. We normally never talk about current politics, and I don't want to start discussing current politics in detail. That's not what this forum is for. This forum is to be able to kind of step back and look at kind of large scale patterns. But we are interested in using ideas that will transform our life. That's what this meetup is about. So I want to deal with politics at that level. All right. But because this is a very special occasion, it's like this was announced just a few minutes ago. So I'm going to um, just say that, firstly, I have to say that, because I'm a big fan of America. I really care about America. I've been in love with America even before I got here. And that has only grown. And so kind of the foundations of America is something that I care about. And so I'm very pleased that um, that we are kind of back to the traditional range of the the politics of America, which I think we had gone slightly away from, I think. Um, and so I'm very, very pleased. But what I want to do is I want to set the context for this meetup. It's a very difficult meetup for me to do because I don't like talking about politics, but I need to talk about it. But I want to do it at a level where you normally won't get to talk about politics at this level. There are multiple forums to talk about current politics. Um, so this is not talking about current politics as usual here, okay? So we have so what I want to do is that we are social beings, we are political beings, and we need to acknowledge that, but I want to look at it at the deepest level possible, okay? Um, so let me try to do that, okay? So let me start by looking at the foundation of America. The motto of America is e pluribus unum, out of the many, one. Okay, so I want to look at what that meant. And what I want to do is that I want to focus on concretes, but I have a very simple rule. You can talk about any concretes till 1950, from beginning of time till 1950, for this purpose of this meetup, or any time after 2050. So skip about 100 years, okay, in the middle. Because what I want to do is I want to focus on the principles of human interaction, because that's the I think what America did was to rework those principles, to restate those principles at a fundamental level. I mean, Lord Acton was right when he said that in 1776, he said something, when he talked about liberty, he said something came into being which was not there before. And it is profoundly true. So I want to kind of focus on that issue of what did the founding fathers do. I also want to bring in the context of the founding fathers to, it's very, most people actually do not study that period in great amount of detail. So do not realize how much disagreement was there at that time and how America was formed in spite of the disagreements or using the disagreements in some way. So disagreements is not something to be scared about. But it's something that you have to take into your strides. And I want to start with the examples of founding fathers and to show how it worked at that time. So, for example, let's start with the you know see, Declaration of Independence. Firstly, let's start with Declaration of Independence. I'll spend a few minutes on the Constitution. Then I would look at the election of 2000 of 1770, 1796, 1800, and 1804, to give a perspective of what kind of divisions that existed at that time. So, firstly, we have to start with the Declaration of Independence because those words of Jefferson, I think, are the most radical words in the political language. And they have had the most profound effect on America first, in creation of America, and then as a beacon and as an inspiration for rest of the world. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And what, of course, he meant everybody is created equal. Um, and we are endowed with certain inalienable rights, among which are rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Not happiness, but pursuit of happiness. And governments are instituted in order to protect these rights. Okay, now this is actually turning everything on its head. It is putting individuals, the ultimate minority, in the center of saying it's individuals that count. And institutions like governments are designed to make it possible for individuals to pursue their goals. This is completely reverse of the traditional view of government. So I've studied, the great books of the Western world throughout the history of the Western civilization and throughout rest of the East too, East more so. They always thought of societies or cultures or governments or kings as primary and individuals as secondary, as kind of supporting it. This turns it exactly on its head. Okay, and that's what America is about. So that is the vision, that an individual can pursue their lives, they can speak their mind, and everything else is designed to make operation of individuals possible, including interactions with one another. Okay, so that's just the philosophical vision, best captured by Jefferson. I want to just say that Adams helped in the formulating of Declaration of Independence. Adams and Jefferson were very close friends in the beginning, and but they came from different political bases. They have, the New England view of rights is different from the Virginian view of rights. I strongly recommend a book, an author called David Hackett Fisher. He is the most brilliant historian of America that I have seen. He talks about these different mores that existed, different values that existed throughout the US. So, for example, in New England, where John Adams comes from, they had certain views. There are certain things that they cared about. So he talks about these four different cultures. This is from his book called Albion Seed. Albion means of England. His entire argument is that there are four different waves of people that came from England. They came from different parts of England. They had different views, and they came and settled in four different areas in the US. What they cared about, what kinds of, not only their values, but what kind of freedoms that they cared about differed. So, for example, New Englanders came from cities. So, for them, civic interaction was critical. They would, but people who came from the the agrarian areas and settled in the Virginia area. They cared about their property. That was very important to them, because that's where you build your farms and you grow from there. Quakers who came who faced religious persecution came and settled in the Pennsylvania Valley. They cared about religious freedoms. Now, people in New England, they came to actually set a religious state, so they didn't care about religious freedom, but Quakers did. People who came from the back countries of Scotland and Ireland and settled in the back country here, Kentucky at this time, they cared about being left alone. They didn't really care about being able to have a civic engagement. They just wanted to be left alone. So that was very dramatically different. And each of these groups fought very hard for what they cared about. And they had to work together. These were different states. It is United States of America. Each state cared about different things, and they had to talk to each other. They had to negotiate with each other. They had to, and as a result of that, we got more freedoms than we would have otherwise gotten, because you had to come up with a system under which all these different people could live and work together. Okay, and the classic example is the relationship between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. They were friends and allies during the formation of the United States. Then they became bitter enemies, bitter political enemies, fought like cats and dogs against each other. Um, as they vied for, being presidents. They were at a time, there was, at that, in the first election, first contested election in 1796, Adams won and Jefferson came second. So Jefferson became the vice president. That was the rule at that time. And then Jefferson won, in 1800. And there's all kinds of, and so they were bitter enemies, political enemies. And towards the end of their life, they reignited their friendship. And they died both on the 50th anniversary of Declaration of Independence, on the same day. And of course, I think it was Adams who said that Jefferson still lives, and little knowing that Jefferson had died the same day. So it's a very interesting. I mean, I'm providing this as an example of saying that good people can disagree, can fight with one another, and cooperate to build great things, fight with one another, and reconciliate at the same time. And that is completely part of the American tradition. If you look at the elections between and the kinds of arguments that were going on between Adams and Jefferson, they were equally heated as anything that you see in modern times. In some ways, it was much worse. There was Aaron Burr, who was the vice president candidate for, vice presidential running mate for Jefferson for, I think, 1800 election. And then because of some error, they could vote, the electors could vote for, give two votes. So Jefferson and Aaron Burr, his vice president, got the same number of votes. Then suddenly Burr turns around and starts to compete with Jefferson to be the president in Congress, because it went to Congress. And there were 36 rounds of ballots. And it was Hamilton, who was opposing Jefferson, thought that Jefferson was better than Burr, so he supported Jefferson. Jefferson became the president. There was an animosity between Burr and Hamilton, just kept on increasing. He criticized, Hamilton just criticized him, criticized Burr in 1804. That led to a duel between Burr and Hamilton. And Hamilton died in that duel. So things, the disagreements were quite large at that time too. At the same time, this whole system worked. So the question on the table is, how do we have large disagreements and still work? Okay, so I wanted to just put this historical context. It's not right to say that we have disagreements now and there weren't disagreements before. There were actually massive disagreements right from the birth of this republic, and we still built the republic, still produced this great country, and you can't lose track of that. So those are my kind of initial thoughts about the divisions and unity. So what I want to do now is I want to now open up. I want to hear from people. Now, again, current political things tend to get very heated. Okay, so number one, we are not talking about current politics. We're just talking about how do people who disagree with each other vehemently deal with each other. Okay, that's the topic that we are talking about in the context of American history. You can expand the context. You can talk about any concrete example up until 1950 and anything after 2050. So except for these 100 years in the middle, you can talk about any example and illustrate how you think about differences. Okay, so I invite you to talk about politics at that level, at a conceptual level. This is not unusual. America is designed by thinking about politics at that level. So when you look at Federalist Papers, when you look at writings of Madison, you're saying factions are natural. There are always factions. There are always going to be factions. How do we design the system so that a faction doesn't enslave other factions? How do we limit the effect? How do we do that geographically between divisions of different levels of government, different branches of government? How do we use the element of time to do that? So it's kind of thinking at that level. So let us do justice to America of how we think about people, thinking about people as a group saying that, okay, we are this and the others are out, is a very tribal way of thinking. That's exactly what America managed to provide a solution to. So let's not go into that the level. So let's talk at the level of kind of political theory of how do you handle disagreements without talking about current politics. So we have 4 rules. If you want to speak, and I do want to hear from you, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Number 2, keep on topic, no current politics, another reminder. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, speak your mind. Feel free to disagree with anybody on anything and do so courteously. These are the rules. These have been the rules of our meetups for the last 4.5 years that I've been running it, and more than like 200 meetups we have done online. And I'm going to strictly enforce that. But with that, I'm hoping to hear your deepest thoughts, and let's see what we can learn from each other. All right, so it's going to be Joe, Mike, Dave, and Sharon next. Joe, go ahead.
Well, that was a wonderful opening, and I'm glad you didn't idealize the past, because the past had its its difficulties, and that was really important. I'm just going to say briefly, I think that the most important thing is that the system that is in place isn't gamed to kill the other side. I think that's the most important thing, is that there are guardrails of democracy. There's processes and procedures, and when elected officials maybe don't perform their duties as they were sent to do, I think that then people start to see the system as being gamed, and it's not necessarily being determined on merit. So just because one side has a majority or the other side has a majority, there seems to be like this. Well, we'll change the rules in order to get what we want. And I think when you ignore the rules of civil, civil discourse essentially and civil procedures, that's where it breaks down, because then people see that the system is inherently gamed against them, or it's being gamed, so that there's this distrust that is lost with the general public. And I think that is what ultimately costs us in the end. I think that's where the breakdown, it becomes a very adversarial. And it's not necessarily, it's when one side decides the other side can no longer, we can't coexist. And that's problematic. And so that, I think that's where it begins to break down. But and it has in the past as well. During the Civil War we had this issue. So
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Absolutely. And I think, I mean, there are two parts. Like one part is the kind of vision. Like like if you forget that you actually are trading with these people, these are your neighbors, these are your friends, these are, if you never lose the context of the commonality, never lose the context that it's a kind of overall it's a win-win situation, and then you are doing there is a competition within the cooperation that is taking place. So that's the kind of philosophical thing. And then if that is true, then by gaming the system, you're trying to kind of tactically do something which is going to hurt you in the long run. So I think that's excellent point. Next up is Dave, Sharon, Linda. Sorry. Uh, Next up is Mike. Mike, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for your brilliant exposition, and I agree with everything you said, and that things are probably better now than they were back then. We didn't end up in duels, and there was not just duels; there was worse in some of the parts of the thing that we haven't talked about. Um, the I in the notes I said history doesn't quite repeat itself, but it sure rhymes. That e pluribus unum comes from the same place that the Ithaca discussion we had a few weeks ago or a week ago comes from, and and it had to do with the fact that they had a real problem, a war, Peloponnesian War, and the world fell apart at that point. So that the rest of that quote is e pluribus unum annuit septis novus ordo seclorum, which means that we are going to be unified now, and we're entering a new era, and that's what and that's on our money right now. Now, Socrates was not just a fat, bald-headed philosopher. He was a brigade commander during the Peloponnesian War, a contemporary of Achilles, of which those poems are made of. Homer didn't immortalize him. In fact, he didn't write much. But Socrates started his academy, and it was a military academy. And his student Plato trained a number of generals and politicians. His student and Plato's student Aristotle trained Alexander the Great. And
Mike, we're getting a little bit too far from the core topic.
Well, Alexander. Okay, I'm going to try and bring this to a close. Alexander the Great basically conquered all of the known world and not just to kill them, but to bring them all together in unity. His when he conquered Persia, he brought Persian, the army surrendered and the king surrendered, and he gave them back all their weapons and all their booty and plunder, and made them officers in his own army, integrated the army. He went to India and did the same thing, and he brought back elephants. What happened in that situation was an example. It turned out when he was 40 years old, he got assassinated, and that sort of ended his influence. And had he lived, Rome might have been under Greece rather than Greece under Rome.
Excellent. Excellent, Mike. So let me pick up on that.
Okay, I want to add something about bringing it up to the Russian Revolution too. But Alexander the Great was
let's Mike. Let's do one thing. Let's put it. Let's stop here for now. You can continue at another time. Okay. We'll add more at the end. I just want to kind of emphasize some of the points that you're making, connected to a general thing, and then I will go to the next person. So what Alexander was trying to do was actually quite revolutionary, because the default traditional Greek position was that there are Greeks and there are barbarians. Okay. What Alexander did was that he actually went, he married, in Persia. He had, like when he went to India, he asked the king, how would you like to be treated? So the king said, treat me like a king. And he said, sure. And, so he tried to do that. He did not have the, what founding fathers had on the top of this is that they actually understood the concept of individuals and said, okay, what exactly do individuals need in order to function? But what Alexander was trying to do is he was trying to do what founding fathers did at a kind of a culture level, with culture as a unit. The kind of divisions between cultures still remain, but he was trying to do something like that. The next step after that was Rome, because what Rome did was that Rome had laws. Okay, now laws are very big, because one of the reasons that the Roman Empire succeeded and kind of survived for as long as it did was that the places that it quote unquote conquered had kings who ruled by just caprice, just depended on what the king decided to do. When that place became Roman, everybody over there could count on the Roman law. So they could count on a kind of a dependable, to be treated at a certain level of fairness, which was not available to them before. So that was also one of the reasons. So it's like, Alexander, Rome, etc., are kind of steps towards that. Magna Carta is another step. So there are kind of these precursors to America, which are moving in the same direction of saying that it's not top down, but it's kind of bottom up, and you kind of have to, acknowledge the dignity of the individual, and only on that base the superstructure stands. Next up is Dave, Sharon, Linda, and Jana. Dave, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Shrikant, and thanks for taking this on. I think this is a great project for all of us to work on. And I'm especially grateful for you changing the time period up to 1950, because I think a day or so before you said World War II, and I would have talked about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but now I'm going to talk about Harry Truman. One of the big problems in our country cotton was one of our most important products, and we imported a lot of people from Africa involuntarily. And I think your Constitution said we're working towards a more perfect union. But one of our big problems is starting off, we had slavery. And of course, we fought a civil war over that. But we've always had this problem. We're treating African Americans as inferior and a lot of other things going on. Harry Truman became president after Franklin Delano Roosevelt died. He only had a high school education. He was one of the few presidents, didn't go to the Ivy League schools. He was an ordinary man. And he said, I didn't go to college, but I read every damn book in the Independence, Missouri Library. But he decided he wanted to do something about our segregation, our racial problem. And he said, well, I can't change society. It's beyond my control, even though I'm the president, I have a lot of power. But I have control over the Army. And they'd done studies. They'd asked, the buck privates and the lieutenants and the generals, do you think we can have an integrated Army? It was back in the early 40s, before Truman was president. And they said 2 or 3% said yes, and the vast majority said no. There's no way that could ever work. And Truman said, I don't care, do it. And it was done, and it was a large step towards equality in our country. It obviously was not the final solution, but to me, it's one of the big questions we always have in our country about the power of government. We also argue about the power of the president. But as I said, it's one important thing, and we've got a lot of big important problems to work on. And maybe we can have this meeting once a month or so and talk about some of these big problems we have to work on. Thanks so much, Shrikant.
Thanks, Dave. Sharon, can you go ahead and make your statement before you leave? Sharon, you need to unmute yourself if you're speaking.
Are you talking about this Sharon, me?
Oh, okay. Maybe it was okay.
Because I didn't request.
Oh, you didn't request. Okay. So then the person who requested, the Sharon who requested, had to leave. She said,
I will say that I'm enjoying this historical retrospective. I'm not as knowledgeable in these areas of history, and I really enjoy listening to it. So I'm enjoying this very much. Thank you.
Thank you. So then let me read out what Sharon wrote. She says, return to our, she says, here are my thoughts. Return to our originating principles and use the power of the people. Recognize and respect others' viewpoints and have those of us interested organize an effort to understand each other's values where common ground can be found. We can come together. There is more, but I need to leave. Okay, so that was Sharon. Next up is Linda, Donna, and Judith. Linda, go ahead.
Hi, Srikan. I am a Chinese who was born in Indonesia, and we were being persecuted in Indonesia. So I came to United States about 20 years ago. So just like you, I really appreciate the United States open for us, people who were persecuted in other country. And I see America is like, I see every country is basically like a family. So America has a lot of problem because we are a big family. Usually it's easier to manage small family than a big family. You can see right now, like small country like Taiwan, New Zealand, they have less problem with COVID because, it's easier to manage a small amount of people. So I think of a few things that can help is, of course, is number one, we have to have a selfless leader. And selfless is, it's everybody can say, selfless is very important in sense of the leader is not self-seeking in every area, in a lot of area. And I give you example, like for example, I have a church Indonesian fellowship. Our leaders like to cook. He cooks and feed people. But when we have a meeting, he would talk and talk and talk and not allow other people to talk. That is actually not selfless. That is trading. He's cooking so other people listen to him. But so selfless is, I think, people really need to be, it's a very important values that every leader always need to improve themselves. Another thing to improve how so people who disagree with each other can agree is very fairness, I think. Fairness, very important in a family, very important in a country. And I think one of the problem America might face is actually affirmative action. In the past, they use affirmative action. I think they try to be fair, but I think it hurts some people. I think I don't know for sure, but I think some native people who has been here for a long time, they feel like, oh, it's not fair. My job is taken away by the minority.
Hi, Linda. That's within the after 1950.
Okay, sorry, but
not allowed.
It has to be fair.
Yes.
Everything has to be designed. And one thing that we can see a country that has many races and still kind of peaceful is Singapore. So Singapore is like a model. I wonder if I was like, oh, Singapore is so successful with their government. I wonder if they can franchise their system to other countries. And another thing that I discussed with my friend who is a Republican is maybe the United States should consider to have red states and blue states. I mean, we have it right now, but okay.
Yeah, no. This we are Linda. So what we are trying to do here is we are trying to look at these issues at a very large scale level. So we are not talking about current politics. We're talking about just principles and apply it, to kind of human beings as such. Okay. So it's very easy. There is a lot of people who discuss this interminably. Everybody has been discussing. So I don't want to get too much into red state, blue states. I don't want to go into affirmative action. I want to keep it at a large level. Okay. Singapore is very recent. There's all kinds of issues with them too. For example, in things one of the core things about America is freedom of speech, of people being able to express themselves fully. But one point I want to build on what you said is that America is a big family. I would say more. It is like family of families. See, most cultures are held together by a common culture. So if you go to India, you go to Indonesia, Indonesia is kind of amalgamations of different cultures, like there is Chinese culture, Indian culture, like the Indonesian kind of native culture, and they kind of interact with one another. The greatness of America is that it allows for people from multiple cultures to come and interact together. It's a system for doing that. And that has been the case throughout, right from the beginning, because it's a country formed by immigrants. They leave their kind of all the negative things about their own culture behind, and they have to kind of learn to deal with other cultures. And that makes possible this. So it's not like most of the other old world people live in a more or less uniform culture. And they are used to dealing with the people of the same culture. Whereas in America, for example, I live in New York, every other person I see is from a different country. And so it's like kind of dealing with people from different, and I think that is one of the strengths of America. And that has been the case right from the beginning. Okay.
Could be one of the strengths and it could be one of the weakness too. It's hard to agree when you have so many values and belief and background.
Absolutely. And the greatness of America is to understand that you don't have to agree, that you can have tremendous disagreements. And if you have a way of interacting where you build on the agreements that you have, and even when you have disagreements, it allows a scale of human interaction, which is many, 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 many times more than if you demand agreement of everybody that you deal with. Next up is going to be Donna. Donna, go ahead. Donna, you need to unmute yourself.
So to live with divides, I believe if we focus on the similarities.
Donna, can you speak more into the mic? I can barely hear you.
Sure. So to live with divides, focus on similarities. And we touched upon this, that America is a melting pot. So if we remove that fact and focus on how we're similar, and to recognize that human behavior is irrational, one of the biggest challenges that we face is because of groupthink and unconscious bias. So the way I like to think to counter both of these effects is for people to have awareness of the irrationality of human behavior and bias. And I always like to think to expand the lens instead of labeling ourselves as Democrats or Republicans or independents, to expand that lens to us, to think of Americans. And I would say even to expand that even further, to think of us ourselves as human beings. Then we remove that natural inclination towards group think, where we're always, when you think of, oh, we're Americans, then we're excluding others. And that's when we run a risk of, that's where the conflict comes from. So I feel that if we continuously remind ourselves that we are human beings on this planet, and the fact is that biologically we're more alike than we are different. I think those are where the key is. Another thing I find that's very effective is to dig deeper into why someone holds a particular belief. And what you'll find out often is that the beliefs aren't really that different. They're more similar than they are different. The conflict comes from how people express those beliefs. So those are some of my thoughts in how we can live with the divide.
Excellent, Donna. Both those points are excellent. One is the point of looking for similarities, and actually and you're absolutely right, between human beings, the similarities are huge. And what happens is that our brain is a difference engine. So it kind of naturally focuses on differences, and similarities kind of become the background. It becomes the foil. So that's why people get kind of caught up on differences. But the similarities are huge. And similarities is the place where there is, tremendous cooperation possible. Also, the second point was very good. The point about actually listening to the other person. What happens is that most people, when there are differences of opinion, they just react to whatever is being said or done. Um, if you are on the premise of actually listening to somebody, you can see where they are coming from, and you can see the structure of what their beliefs is, their position is, and you are in a position to actually find some common ground. You can say, okay, we agree with this much. Now, this is where the disagreement is. And the moment you do that, actually the animosity that people feel goes down dramatically, because otherwise you're simply saying that your immediate reaction is just no to the whole person. Whereas here, when you actually listen to the person, you can see the same, you can see that they are starting. There are many starting points that you can agree on. And then you can see the differences, and then you can talk about the differences. So excellent points, Donna. Next up is Judith, followed by Francoise. Judith, go ahead.
Yep, thank you. So yeah, I think I very much agree with you, Shrikant, that it's the cultures, the multiple cultures in our country that is our greatest asset, because I feel like it's both the similarities and the differences together combined that give us the ability to get up, change, switch it up. It causes a lot of disagreement and argument, but at times, but by having different cultures, we learn to see things in different ways, and we have different perspectives. We can gain different perspectives. So if we don't want to make everyone all the same, or we want to look for the commonality that we have between those differences, of course, but I feel like the best way to achieve that. So I mean, I started by thinking, that there will always be nefarious forces in a large country, in a government. They'll take different forms over time, as technologies change, as social conditions change. So it's not really that you can target specific nefarious forces. It's very much, I think, a bottom-up approach. So I think our country has rebounded. It was so interesting to hear you give that history that I didn't know about, of our own country here. But it seems to me that's why we've rebounded, is because we do bring in differences. It is a country that brings in differences, and then we assimilate those things and they become a commonality, but it gives us a flexibility of thinking that is really advantageous. And if we want our country to keep having that, we have to keep bringing that in, and we have to nurture it in our school system, I think, is to raise children as thinkers and have a greater emphasis on the humanities, or maintain an emphasis on the humanities, so that they can think about different things. And so we don't just steer toward occupational training, because when people can think about differences and similarities and listen and see other points of view, then I think that's our safest way to keep our country, having the democracy and keeping it on track. It'll tilt one way or another, and we bring it back.
Excellent, Judith. I think those are great points. I think this is one of the critical things that is at the root of kind of formation of the American character, that right from the beginning, see, in the old world, you were surrounded by people just like you all the time. So anybody else would be saying, oh, that's a stranger, right? Whereas here, when you're surrounded by people from all kinds of backgrounds, you actually learn about individuals. You can see the individual differences. You can understand where people are coming from, because we are enormously complex beings as human beings. And when we are looking at looking at a human being only with the context of a very small insular culture, you are missing out on all the richness that you have just by interacting with people who are very different from you. You will get a perspective on yourself, let alone other people, of seeing the full scope, full differences, full kind of range of what human beings can be. The second point I want to make is that differences are not bad by themselves. Actually, somebody who is strong at something, much stronger and you are weak at something, that's actually a good thing. So if you have some common base of interaction, actually the differences serve you. It enables both the parties or all the parties to benefit tremendously from the differences. One final point I want to make is the concept of the frontier. Okay, the concept of the frontier has been critical for America. Most of the cultures throughout the world developed in a very limited context. They kind of operated within a same geographical area. And so they thought that, that's all we have. So if somebody else comes here, that's bad for us because we will lose what we have. The idea of frontier is a very fundamental idea. It is a metaphysical idea, epistemological idea. And that is built into the American character, American way of thinking. It's not a limited pie that you have to divide and fight over. There is a lot more that you can make. There is a large world out there. There are so many possibilities. And if you work with people together, all of that is open. So it's not a zero-sum game. There is tremendous expansion that is possible. And that actually conditions how you look at human relations. It's not that, okay, I have a limited things and we are trying to divide it up. No, if we work together, we can access 10 times more or 100 times more or 1,000 times more than what we could do just on our own. Next up is going to be, in just a second here, Francoise, Jeff Nugent, and Jeff. Francoise, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to try to stay within that large scale, which is really wonderful to be in. And the main question which comes to my mind to succeed, is what can we do to reach consensus or to reach compromise? That's what we look for with respect of others. And it's what is the most difficult. And I want to give an example from my own experience, because like you, I love America. I was born in France. I spent 30 years of my life in France, and the rest I spent many years traveling over 100 countries. And I've been in the States since 1985 between California, Texas, and other states, and now I'm in New York. One thing I've noticed in the state, which I love, is the respect of people for religion. And I think that respect for religion, I've never really heard, like other problem, having religious battles of religious, I can't find the word, the way we see them in other countries. And I think it comes from the fact that the founder's father put as one of the first principle, the freedom of religion, because the first pioneers had left England to evade the persecution of religion. So in the Constitution, the freedom of religion is already adopted and accepted by everybody. Now, if I look at the system in France, it only goes back to 1904. It's in 1904 that, quite a few centuries later, that France declared a separation of state and religion. But it was considered as a Catholic country. And even today, it's still considered by many, many people as a Catholic countries. And the problem we have with terrorism and the problem of religion in many countries is because there's no foundation on that principle of respect and accepting other people. So it's one of the things in the state which I really like, because everybody has definitely the choice of religion. Now, there's another point I would like, I disagree on what has been said. I don't think America is a melting pot. The melting pot would be a goal to melt everybody to have one single one single metal in a way. You know, when everything is melted, you have one composed element. I rather prefer talking about mosaic, you know, because the mosaic, you can do a beautiful artwork and put it all the little pieces together and have something looking good. So by looking at a mosaic, there's hope. Looking at a melting pot, it will never succeed, in my opinion.
Sure.
So,
So I want to comment on both the points. Both are excellent points. So first is freedom of religion. I see freedom of religion. Of course, freedom of religion is very important, but it points to something even deeper. It is freedom of conscience, kind of respecting the conscience of each and every person. It's connected to freedom of speech. It's the same, you know, it's the same idea that you respect the mind of individual person, that they can choose what they think, what they feel, and that should be, you know, you should have respect, mutual respect for that. So it's a very deep principle held over here. So that's number one. Ed, will come to you. I'm going. You're in line, okay? The second point is about melting pot. Actually, it's kind of like a stew. I think stew is a better one, better way of capturing it. People continue to have their own identity for a period of time, but whatever they had, whatever flavor, whatever values that they have, actually seep in to the general culture somewhat, and whatever the other cultures had seeps into them. So they are still kind of separated out in some way, but there is an exchange. So it is not mosaic where each piece is separate. Each piece actually adds, like a stew, it adds the flavor to the entire broth. But the broth is different than these individual things. So they have both those things. Next up is going to be Jeff Nugent, Jeff, Ed, and Jonathan. Jeff Nugent, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Shrikant. Thanks so much for doing this, this meetup. Certainly turned out to be on time, didn't it? As some of you know, I actually run workshops for people around the world on the subject of leadership and conflict, which is really a subject that is focused on leadership and productive disagreements. And one of the books that we refer to in that was a book by M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled, called The Different Drum, Community Making and Peace. And in essence, he lays out the 4 stages of every relationship, which is what every country is, especially the way that the United States is organized. It's a special focus on that in a way. And the first stage is pseudo harmony, where we kind of pretend that to get along, things are good enough, it's all right. At the beginning of every relationship, a dating relationship, a friendship, whatever it might be. The second stage is what he calls chaos, which is where we decide that we want something from this relationship. We might want someone to agree or disagree with us. We might disagree on where we're going to go for dinner. We might disagree on all kinds of different things. In a relationship, it's often called the first argument, and you see what happens after the first argument. We then have to decide, is it important to us to be together as well as to get enough, a good enough amount of what we want or what we need? And the third stage he calls emptiness. And in the emptiness phase, 2 things happen. One, there's some process for each of us working together to achieve some level of consensus, some level of agreement without really strong disagreement regarding the outcome. And then we reach that outcome. So both things matter, because if we achieve agreement in a way that's a deal breaker by forcing each other into it, really as Joe started from the beginning here, then we lose trust. Or if we end up forced into some sort of agreement there that's not good enough for us, we lose trust. And the relationship is based on trust, where we care enough about being together and the end result is good enough, and whatever process we use is adequately mutually respectful. If we get through that, then we get to the fourth stage, which he calls community. And community, there's no guarantee that a relationship will get to community, but then of course we will come back through it again when we have disagreements. And the founding of the United States was based on certain agreements, which were never going to be fully sustainable, which is why we fought this terrible civil war. And some of the processes that we have are very difficult. And also to Joe's point, perceived as not quite fair, not quite representative. And a lot of the conflict that we have today in the United States is based not on the fact that we have differences, but that our methods for resolving them are not quite fair and that our outcomes are not quite acceptable. And so these four stages of pseudo-harmony, chaos, emptiness, and community, ways of resolving differences that come out, that result in good enough outcomes and that are mutually respectful in their process, that are built upon, are always built upon an adequate level of mutual trust is essential. And it's the only way we can be together, and we're working on it. And it's what our leaders constantly refer to from Lincoln on, discovering a more perfect union.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
all
you,
I have
Jeff.
to say.
Thanks, Jeff. Next up is the other Jeff.
Hi, the other Jeff is here. I want to, there's so many ways into this topic, but the one that jumped to mind once we started talking about it was that compromise is uncomfortable. It's like, and the topic I want to bring up is you know, in our time where we have devices that tell us what we want, otherwise we get different devices. We live in a neighborhood that people who agree with us, otherwise we move. But we have so much control over our environment that we haven't developed any fortitude for disagreement is the worry that I'm putting forward. And a lot of that is due to technology. It may also be that the technology holds the antidote to that as well, but I really haven't thought that through, and I was wondering what ideas people had that we're basically it's a little bit similar to the thesis advanced in the coddling of the American mind, I think.
Sure, but we cannot talk about anything between 1950 to 2050. So let's talk about after 2050. So
I thought you were referring to history. I wasn't saying anything about history, but
yeah, no. So what I'm saying is that I mean, I think technology is a very powerful thing. But just like people physically interacting with one another and learning how to deal with different cultures, people coming from different backgrounds, is a good thing. That's what happens in a city, any city, but you know, a great city like New York, for example, you kind of take that into your own strides. I think with technology in 2050, we're already kind of seeing things in that direction. Like, look at what is going on here. You know, we are sitting in all kinds of places across the world, and we are talking, and we are expressing our thoughts, and we are going back and forth and learning from each other. People are coming from all kinds of different backgrounds, all kinds of different viewpoints, and we are able to interact. And it's the technology which is making it possible. So by 2050, that trend will increase further. So anybody who wants to connect, wants to see commonalities, wants to benefit from differences as well, their ability to do that has been going up since 1950, and it is going to grow up even more after 2050. So absolutely. So I think technology is a very good thing. But again, technology is just a means. So it is anybody who wants to use the technology to pursue exactly opposite goals, it will enable them to pursue them as well. So ultimately, it depends on how many people, you know, want to push one way versus the other. Next up is Ed, followed by Miguel. Ed, go ahead. You need to unmute yourself. Go ahead. Ed, you need to unmute yourself.
All right. I just want to point out that e pluribus unum was a goal, one which we have not achieved. I want to tell you about my experience outside the New York City multicultural bubble. For
Wait. Is it anywhere between 1950 or 2050?
It is, but you're not talking about the America of today. And I'm only going to use very general terms.
Okay, go ahead, try.
The people out there in the non-multicultural bubble have re-ghettoized themselves.
No, Ed, think of something outside the context. Outside, it's because we're deliberately trying to get a larger perspective on this. We are trying to see commonalities and differences as was handled without getting into the common discussions that everybody is getting into all the time. That's what we are trying to do here.
Okay, then I will have to stop and think.
Sure. And anytime you have something, just go ahead and raise your hand and I'll put you on, okay? Miguel, you're next. Miguel, you need to unmute yourself. Oh, sorry, Jonathan, I missed you. Jonathan, sorry. Sorry, Miguel, let me get to Jonathan first.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. My observation is just about systems and technological change more generally. It relates obviously today, but also in past times.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, you know, our Constitution was founded late 1700s. And during that time, we've had multiple revolutionary, you know, worldwide changing events, and yet it's persevered. But there's been times when it's failed, like during the Civil War, our Constitution failed. We had a war, we had to reconstruct it, we had to pass amendments. And so, but one of the things that I'm reminded of about the Constitution is that fundamentally it's a system for managing failure of institutions, failure of people. It has checks and balances, and it's, you know, but those will only get you so far. They're sort of like, they're like brakes on a car, or, you know, you only have so much. They run dry if you don't maintain them. So I do think that fundamentally there's sort of some very deep questions about what we as individuals, how we interact with our society. Like, what is it a reasonable goal for us to be as citizens, to be educated? Is it really realistic to expect that the citizenry at large will be these sort of founding father like you know, rational beings, or maybe a percentage of them? How do we manage that? And how, you know, how important is it in education, in educating our citizens in order to be able to, you know, ride out these waves, because these are waves that will hit our system. Like, I don't think turmoil and deep impulses of humanity are going away anytime either, between now and 2050 or beyond. I think there, as long as we're human beings, there's always going to be there. So these are all just things I'm wondering about. But I think there's, just to sum it up, I think there's fundamental questions about our document, you know, our Constitution, and whether we need to amend it or whether we just need to have a better understanding of it, that are outstanding for me.
Sure. Excellent questions, John. So first thing I would say is that the way in which founding fathers saw government is that government is the brake, because they see fundamentally all the initiative lies with individuals. And what they're trying to do is that they're trying to protect the ability of individuals to have to exercise that initiative. And the government is trying to just protect that. So government, by most definitely, the entire system of American government, and that is very odd. Okay, this is a dramatically different idea of government than existed throughout, throughout the history of the Western, throughout the Western conversation. The ideal of the government has always been a benevolent king who will help you. Okay, that's not what American system is about. American system puts the, they're saying that prime movers are individuals like you and me. And that's where all the positives is going to come from. What the government is trying to do with this enormously complex system of checks and balances is to protect us so that we can continue to do that. So that, but excellent question. Excellent point. Next up is Miguel, followed by Jean. Miguel, go ahead. Miguel, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, I don't know what's happening with Miguel. All right, next up is Jean.
Yeah, I want to agree with what Jonathan mentioned. I think, if you really want every citizen to make decisions for the country, they will first be educated, second, be well informed. And as we know, even our current film industry, the box office movie driven by mass, and usually they're not high quality movie. Luckily, they have Oscar award, which at the end of the year, you have some good movies. So, and my sister lives in Germany. Their election actually is.
Jean, sorry,
So I want to
came
give
in
an
late.
example.
You came in late. We are not talking about, we can't use any example from 1950 to 2050.
No.
Choose anything else.
Okay. So, so the example, because people have less limited education, that's why they end up with a president in reality show. So I think another, my experience is, my limited experience with politics I found is the rich people's game.
No. Jean, we are not talking about current politics. Okay, that's one of the rules. We are not talking about current politics. But let me address the question. Let me address the issue. So firstly, the impression that people have about that, what things were like during the foundation of this republic are all wrong. The founding fathers that you think of, people like Adams, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, those were just few individual people. It isn't most of the people. Most of the people were not, that educated. They did not read as much. They were not as, so it was not as if that the entire, everybody was at that level. Secondly, so that's one thing. Secondly, in terms of the, just if you want to look at just education level and the knowledge of things, the number of people of the caliber that we have today in the world, let alone America, is many times more. So the human potential here, even when you take it as a small percentage, the scale of it is much larger. Again, just look at the population during the founding fathers. It's a small number of people relatively. We have like just the number of people is very large, and even a small percentage of them, the level of education, access to resources, all of that is much larger. But at the same time, the future does depend on each of us and how hard we learn and how much we actually try to change the world. So it does rest in each of our hands, but it's a lot more of us, and our ability to do things is much larger than what was there before. All right, Miguel, are you ready to speak? Yes, go ahead. You're still on mute. Yeah, no, go ahead. I can go ahead. No, I can't hear you. There is some problem with your sound. Okay, there is some problem with your sound, Miguel. I can't hear you. We can't hear you. Okay, all right. So Miguel, you're having problems with your audio. Once you fix it, just let me know. You can go ahead and type exclamation mark again, and I will put you on. Same with Ed. Now, what I want to do next is, now I want to, okay, Ed. Yes, go ahead, Ed. You need to unmute yourself again.
I've thought of a way to make my point.
Yes.
My ancestors came to this land in the 1630s.
Okay,
Far enough
good
back,
time
right?
frame.
They came fleeing religious persecution. When they arrived in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, they found they had to flee again from the persecution of the Puritans.
Yes.
And they went down the coast of North America in a canoe and landed in Rhode Island.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been here a very long time. My impression is that we are not any closer to achieving the goals of E pluribus unum than we were at the time my ancestors arrived.
Okay.
I could expand on that, but that's my basic point.
Sure. So I will, respectfully disagree. Let's compare it. You can't, we can't compare I think the right comparison is to compare the American culture with other cultures that have existed. The other cultures, the old world cultures that are there, are far more insular. And the idea of going between cultures and melding or kind of working with multiple cultures, regardless of your base culture, and putting something together and to build something greater, the extent to which America has succeeded in doing that. We have had kind of waves of immigration over time. And the interesting thing about immigrants is that it's their children who become Americans and make them kind of more Americans. Like when you come from another country, many times you live with everything that you had before. You kind of adopt it. I'm a little bit of exception. I really love America, but many immigrants who come here, they like America, but they continue to be where they came from. But that's not the case with their children. Their children become, they are almost indistinguishable from Americans, other Americans. So, when you look at all of that, so if you want to put it as a kind of Platonic ideal, that are we one, it's a vision. Yeah, I agree with you that it's a vision. The extent to which we have been able to have waves of people from multiple bases and be able to do things together has been quite astonishing. While are we one? No. Will we ever be one? No, because we are individuals. How can we be one? We can't be identical to each other. We will still have disagreement. We'll have our own opinion. That's not bad. It's just a question of, can we work together? And the extent to which we've been able to work together in American history has been astounding by any standards. So that's what I would say. Let me go to Miguel is back. His audio is working apparently, and then Charles. Miguel, go ahead. You need to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So going back to the original topic of Bucky, I found this.
No, we're not going to
Bucky.
Bucky, we're going to start at 2:30.
I know, but
sure, go ahead.
I'm doing a crosswalk here.
Okay, great.
So on one of the passages, Bucky says, "Man cannot compete physically as a muscle and brain automaton, as a machine, against the automated power tools which he can invent, while metaphysically mastering the energy income from the universe with which ever more powerfully to actuate this ever more precise mass production tools. So we invented this monster called social media. And
Miguel, we can talk about this during the Bucky thing. Where this one is about kind of the core idea of America without reference to talking about anything between 1950 and 2050. So social media is
all right.
off.
Oh, so I thought it was between 1950 and
no.
So
You can talk. No, you can talk about anything other than between 1950 and 2050, because we want to take a large view of how do you disagree with people and still work with them.
Okay, so I'll go back then to the other topic that I had pre-1950. Sure. So when the founding fathers, explicitly Jefferson, when they were writing this large vision, they shared a similar approach to the regenerative approach that I'm following now, which is if you focus on problems looking back at the past, then you're narrowing the solutions or the field of view to resolving that problem only. If you look forward, you can open the field of view and create a solution which transcends the original situation and brings together a better future. So, like, for example, Jefferson had slaves and all these things, and there was other issues that he understood that within the current frame of mind, it was bad. But he saw a future where those things were no longer there, with the expectation that people would, with the writing of the Constitution, would be able to transcend the current reality and then move on to reality which was evolved. And then as history went on, the amendments came because we were looking at a better future. The problem is that, well, I'm stopping in 1950, but the amending of the Constitution is the process of using the voting of the individual as a tool to find the opinion of that individual and create a better future. My point is that between 1900 and 1950, there has been a disconnection of the utilization and implementation of that model to some extent. I mean, we had some rough areas, some rough times in the early 1900s, and we will continue to experience those rough patches in the future, but we have to stick to the model with that long-term vision that the voters can highlight the need for constitutional amendments. And that's it.
Thank you, Miguel. So absolutely, I mean, one of the points that was great that I liked was that once you have the right vision, then you kind of discover things which are not congruent with that vision, and over time, so there has been expansion of rights, for example, over time. There is a vision, and then you keep on expanding it to include more and more. So that's great. Next up is going to be Charles. Charles, go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to make 2 points. One is that I think we need to all try to see what kind of common principles for engagement, for reconciliation, for dialogue and compromise we can enact, and try to adopt that first ourselves, be the example and convince others. So there should be some reciprocal nature to this. If we believe that the other side is not listening enough, we should first ask ourselves, are we listening to them? If we feel like they're not being empathetic enough, are we offering them the same empathy, so on and so forth. So that's maybe the more uplifting point. My other more historical and cynical point is that if you look at it throughout history, and this actually goes before the 1950s. In fact, there's a recent book called A Brief History of Anti-Populism by Thomas Frank, about how basically the dynamics of populism. And oftentimes we tend to think of the term as quite negative nowadays, but often it actually hides that there are some deep structural societal issues that is people are trying to channel through populism. Now, we may not agree with the leaders they pick, but we should look at what are the dynamics behind it. How can we fix these problems? Are there certain grievances paying those things that are affecting these people to act this way? And because populism, if we don't fix the problems the people are experiencing, it often leads to, terrible leaders that we don't like to see. And I should also point out that whenever there's a history or period where there's increasing amount of political divisiveness, it oftentimes can be done to benefit those who benefit from division. So we may think that both sides are fighting, the good fight. Instead, we're benefiting, those who benefit from the polarization of our country. Yeah. So these are my 2 points.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent, Charles. Great points. I particularly like the point about kind of empathy, and empathy starting with you. Because it's always easy to say that, oh, that other person doesn't really know. No. It's you start, and if everybody starts with themselves and saying, am I actually listening to the other person? And because even the second point is about just listening, seeing what is actually going on. And so I think that is huge. That is huge. Okay, so now we are almost at 2 o'clock. We have the next meetup coming at 2:30. So I want to start wrapping up. Now, the way I want to wrap up is again through questions. Okay, again, keep focused on kind of the general principle. And what I want to ask you is, what are the big questions that you're walking away with? If you want to say if you want to quickly say about what you got from this meetup, you know what, let's do for what you got from this meetup, because I never do meetups like this on politics. So I would like to hear what it was like for folks. So go ahead, and again, I'm not going to ask people to, I'm not going to call on people myself, but I would really appreciate it if you let me know what you thought. So you can go ahead and type ! If you would like to give your takeaways. Keep your takeaways to about a minute or so. And the same rules apply. No current politics. You can go ahead and type ! To speak. Keep on topic. Be brief. And with that, let me start with Joe. Joe, go ahead.
I'm going to be very brief. I mean, the main thing that I took away from this discussion is that it's unique to any other political discussion that I usually have had. And I mean, and that was, large part due to the way you were able to moderate everyone. And I think that, there are a number of things that I could go through as far as what I'm doing to take away. But the one thing I would just like to add is I liked what Dave had mentioned with maybe trying to do this monthly, because I think that very few times are there political discussions where they extract general principles that really start to get to the heart of why we disagree and how we disagree. And so most of them are about what this person believes or that person believes. And that devolves very, very quickly. Whereas this, I think, is at a very strategic level. And I think we also discussed a lot about the systems themselves and how they evolved, which I think is really important. One of the other major things that I also took away was, how to maybe look at the United States is not just look at the problems that we're facing, but also look at the relative nature of the problems that we're facing. With your interactions with Edwin, it's some of the things that your conversation was actually kind of spoke to that. The other is the really important thing is looking at the similarities. I believe Donna had brought up, but it's and our biases as well. But I had thought about that prior to coming into this, is that the founding fathers and ourselves, like, you need to look at a problem that you're trying to solve. And I think that we get away from that now. I think we speak more to the ideas of concepts, or not even, truthfully, it's concepts or ideologies, than we do the actual problems themselves. And ultimately, what happens in that process is that we tend to ignore rules, and we also tend to ignore people and problems that tend to not get solved. So that's what I'm really taking away, is the idea of how to not only look at similarities, but to look at problems, and then to look at the relative nature of the problems themselves. So thank you very much for
Lev.
hosting.
Thanks, appreciate it. Next up is Dave, Linda, Jean, Julie, Judith, and Francoise. Dave, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Shrikant. A great meetup. And it brings me back to the Jordan Peterson session a couple weeks ago about Carl Rogers. The conversation is healing. And I think that's what we did today. I think we did some healing. Thanks again.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Next up is Linda.
I just want to say thank you to Jeff Nugan. I really like the point about 4 stages of relationship. I think this is probably one of those things that should have been taught at school. And the funny thing, when he mentioned the title of the book, I was like, what? The different drunk? And then I was like, okay, I Google it at Amazon. Okay, he write the other book about drum. So thank you very much. Very good point. And I think everyone needs to learn that, because we can apply in even a friendship, friendship relationship, and all kind of relationship. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Next up is Jean, Julie, Judith, and Francoise. Jean, go ahead.
Yeah, the question I have is, as we can see, it's very obvious our election have such a huge difference from the inland and the coast. It's different demographic.
No. We can't talk about current politics.
No. And my question is, how can we bring the people together? The people here where are they all from? I believe they all from the coast. How we reach the people in the middle land, then we can really have a real conversation. And did the politician, they ever win? Do they ever try to do that? Do they give them a voice? How do we do that? That's my question.
Yeah. Okay. So next up is Julie.
So, hi. My question would be, I was thinking about, we have communication skills taught to people because people don't communicate very effectively. Basic things like acknowledging each other, things like that, rules. And we have in the judges world, they have mediation and things like that to deal with some of this problems in delivering and communicating. And even in doctors' medical school, they have a class on bedside manner now. So I'm wondering, maybe there already is something that they could teach politicians how to communicate more effectively, because I think the communication gets in the way of the messages entirely.
Wonderful. So folks, you can either talk about your takeaway or the question that you're walking away with. Next up is Judith. Judith, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'm just taking away. It was super interesting. But now that when you ask what I take away, I feel like very much still at a loss of like what I can bring to my life that I didn't already kind of know. I guess I feel blessed that I have people with very different opinions around me that are extremely challenging for me. So I have a place to practice, where I think Kang was feeling she didn't. Practice, that empathy, but, I just don't know the form, and, I don't know how to exactly execute yet, but that's what I want to do. I want to learn how to heal. And I think it starts with us individually. So I think I just have to practice.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think one of the things the simplest one, this is kind of based on Carl Rogers. This is based on some things which were said here. It's just the power of listening, instead when somebody says something which you disagree with, actually try to listen and try to figure out where they're coming from. And even just the act of doing that dissipates animosities. When somebody sees that even if you disagree with them, you're actually trying to understand where they're coming from, that actually changes the dynamic completely. So instead of just reacting with your own feelings back at whatever the other person says, just listening to them and trying to figure out where they're coming from. I think that's huge. Next up is let me see. It's going to be Francoise, John, and Claire.
Well, thank you, Shrikant. I'm really happy I was listening to you tonight, because it was really interesting. But I'm wondering if there would be a way to make it more global. I find it's extremely American. And by being solely American, I feel like being in a closed box, when in a lot of subject, sociology and history and a lot of example could be expanded on a much larger scale, and living by experience, and having a global approach to all those problems.
Yeah, no, Francoise is from France, originally, basically based, she's a New Yorker, but currently in France. So I understand what you're saying, but what I would say is that the American version is a universal version. Like, though we are talking about this, the ideas apply regardless where people are coming from, and whether it applies to people currently in America or elsewhere. So it's a way of dealing with things. And because America has had the maximum impact, maximum experience of dealing with people from everywhere, I think this is a perfect place to start. And on that note, I want to thank France, as we say, thank you, Lafayette, so we still remember that, we won't forget that. All right, next up is John, followed by Claire.
Yeah, I want to echo Joe's comments from before. I think this is sort of a sadly unique discussion that's been going on, and too few in recent years. And I think that the fundamental problems we are facing today are systemic in nature, and historical fluctuations and technological changes, and those sorts of problems require constructive dialogues about systemic reforms or systemic changes or investments. And unless we do that, we don't really have much of a chance of actually adjusting. And I think one of the what I'm reminded of from this conversation is one of the most sort of enduring things about the American Constitution is that it is adaptable to different times. And so I think that's our main challenge, is to have a constructive dialogue about either amending or applying the rules of our Constitution for the times we live in.
Beautiful. Thank you, John. Next up is Claire.
Yeah, building on these kind of concepts of communication and listening, which I do think are really true American values. And to your guys' point, I mean, we have the Enlightenment to think for that we could kind of orient as individuals and really listen and speak and write. And I really think that writing is such a beautiful element of our history. And one of my favorite anecdotes on Lincoln is that he would write these letters he called hot letters, where he would never send them, and he would write on them, never signed, never sent. And I think that there's a really beautiful element of listening and internalizing and writing, and what you choose to do with that writing is up to you. But really one of the greatest freedoms we all have is being able to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. So folks, let me tell you about what's coming up, and then we'll wrap this up. Immediately after this at 2:30, we're going to have a meetup on Buckminster Fuller's ideas. Uh, the core idea he has is of thinking of things as systems. And maybe you'll get some inspiration from thinking about this problem through that. My friend CJ, who has been studying Buckminster Fuller for past, I think, 3 decades or so, he's going to give you kind of the overview of key concepts of Buckminster Fuller. So it's going to be very, very special. So I would recommend that very highly. That's at 2:30. Tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time, my friend Michael is going to be back, and he's going to be talking about cause and effect. So, or not cause and effect, but cause and affect. So basically, our emotions and what are the causes behind our emotions. So that's going to be at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. And at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time, I'm going to have an author who's written more than a couple dozen books on systems. How do you think about systems engineering? And we are going to focus on his book called Life Principles. So he has 10 life principles, uh, what you can use to kind of transform your life and to guide your life, which are very, he's very, very good. And I look forward to that. So that's going to be at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. So that's a very quick overview of what is going on. I'll also tell you about 2 more things. There is a series on Monday called Outwitting the Devil. It's very deep ideas on self-improvement, led by Chase and Alex. And I'm doing a meetup on syntopical reading, on the book, How to Read a Book, and the Great Ideas. These are works of Mortimer Adler. That's going to be on Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So that's what is coming up. And I want to thank everybody. I thought I was initially, as I said, I was a little bit scared about talking about politics, but I thought we did a fantastic job of doing justice to America, by actually talking about the foundations of what make working together possible. Um, and so again, I want to emphasize, we are individuals. We are all going to be different. And you should not be surprised that people disagree with you. And there is all kinds of disagreement. That comes from just the fact that we are individuals. And that's fine. And at the same time, we are social beings and we have a lot to gain from each other. So we need to figure out what our commonalities are and how we can actually use our differences too, in order to produce a benefit, which working together, we can do a lot more than we can do individually on our own. So it's a complete win-win, and you should not let disagreements, many of the disagreements that people get all worked up upon. The reason I deliberately focused on not current times is that current times people get emotionally charged, emotionally they react to things, so they're not able to see patterns. Just by looking at exactly the same kind of patterns at another time, in the past or in the future, you can see the principle, and then hopefully you can take the principle and apply it regardless of your emotions. So even if you're feeling uncomfortable, even if you're feeling, oh, I don't like what this person is saying, if you can keep that context in mind of what understanding the commonalities and respecting the differences has done for us as human beings and as Americans, we can go ahead and bring it to bear on the current times. And we are going to need a lot of that in order to do well in the future. I'm, delighted that you came. So we'll take a short break of about, in the next meetup, we will start at 2:32. All right, folks. So thank you very much.